The Indo-Pacific region spans a vast and diverse terrain, from the sunny shores of California to the bustling megacities of East Asia. This dynamic region accounts for over 60% of global GDP and is home to more than half the world's population. But here's a striking fact. China alone makes up over one-third of the Indo-Pacific's total GDP. To put that in perspective, when China's economy catches a cold, the economic shockwaves ripple across Asia and reverberate around the globe. From Thai factories dependent on Chinese tourists, to Australian wine producers relying on trade with China, to American car companies needing Chinese semiconductor chips, much of the world has a stake in a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. That's why the new Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, launched by President Biden, has seized so much attention. This expansive economic initiative aims to reshape the 21st century economic architecture of the world's most consequential region. In this video, we'll dive into the story behind the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, how it seeks to reassert America's economic leadership at a time of growing Chinese dominance, and what it might mean for the future of power and influence in the region. To understand the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, we have to rewind back 5 years to 2017, when the Trump administration withdrew from the sweeping 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The TPP was the centerpiece of President Obama's Asia policy, taking nearly a decade of painstaking negotiations to complete. The sprawling pact covered everything from automobile safety standards to intellectual property protections. It aimed to establish robust trade flows between NAFTA economies like Canada and Mexico with Asian powerhouses like Japan, Vietnam and Singapore. Advocates saw it as a way to check China's economic might in the region. But Trump railed against the TPP during his campaign, calling it a terrible deal that undermined American workers. True to his America First platform, withdrawing from the agreement was one of his first acts as president. This U.S. reversal sent shockwaves across Asian capitals that had staked significant political capital on the deal. It left economic partners like Japan and Vietnam in the lurch. Trump's unilateral move created a leadership vacuum at a vital time. Because as the U.S. was stepping back, another nation was ready and willing to step forward: China. In 2013, newly elevated President Xi Jinping announced the launch of China's sweeping Belt and Road Initiative. This promised over $1 trillion to finance infrastructure projects across the developing world, centered on Asia. Highways, rail lines, ports, pipelines. The Belt and Road seemed custom-built to address Asia's hunger for infrastructure and thirst for capital. Xi toured the region touting win-win cooperation and shared prosperity under the banner. But many saw a deeper strategy at play. Behind the economic sweet talk, China's influence was dramatically expanding. Its economic tentacles were spreading across the region through strings attached to Belt and Road projects. Smaller neighbors like Laos and Cambodia grew increasingly dependent on Chinese investment and tilted toward China's orbit. Suddenly, the future economic landscape of Asia seemed centered around one rising power. The Trump administration did little to counter China's economic offensive in Asia, scrapping the TPP while launching a trade war. But signs of bipartisan pushback were growing in Washington, as China's ambitions crystallized. Major speeches by Vice President Pence and Secretary Pompeo portrayed China as a revisionist menace on multiple fronts. The 2020 election campaigns from both Biden and Trump adopted a hawkish tone on China. So when Biden entered office in 2021, a focus on competing economically with China in Asia was perhaps inevitable. But the administration understood it needed its own affirmative vision for Asian engagement, not just countermoves. Hence in 2022, after over a year of consultation, the White House launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. While light on details initially, IPEF was sold as writing the new rules for the 21st century economy. At its core, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework stands on 4 central pillars. First, with the goal of facilitating trade flows and coordinating standards through improved supply chain resilience, customs procedures and e-commerce. Second, promoting more diverse, secure and trusted supply chains in sectors like telecom, semiconductors, batteries and pharmaceuticals. This means some decoupling from China. Third, ensuring a level playing field by enforcing standards on tax transparency, corporate accountability, and hiding of assets. And fourth, accelerating the transition to renewable energy across the region, including cooperation on technology and financing. Unlike a traditional trade agreement, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework does not require reciprocal market access or lower tariffs. There are no binding dispute settlement mechanisms requiring legal changes by partners. Instead, it primarily focuses on voluntary standards, coordination and information sharing in the four pillar areas. This flexible approach helped convince key partners like India and Indonesia to join the initial 13 IPEF members spanning Asia and Oceania. The launch of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework makes clear that a core strategic priority is deepening economic ties between the US and India. While India opted against joining the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework launch in May 2022, apprehensive about market access, Biden's team worked intensively to secure India's agreement to subsequently join in the trade and clean energy pillars. As the region's largest democracy, rapidly growing economy and future population powerhouse, cooperation between Biden and India's Prime Minister Modi could define Indo-Pacific Economic Framework success. Yet differences remain in areas like digital regulations and agriculture that need bridging. India's economy is still emerging, with complex domestic political hurdles. But its young population presents enormous potential. Binding India closer through trade and investment would strengthen both economies while giving the US a crucial ally in balancing China's weight. Much still depends on the personal dynamic between Biden and Modi. Their virtual summit in April 2022 did seem to reset relations after difficult years. While competition with China is not stated, it clearly animates Washington's India outreach. While the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework is framed in broad terms without targeting any nation, China's looming presence is inescapable. The tagline, "Right Rules for the 21st Century," implies replacing outmoded standards set by China with a more democratic and transparent system. The emphasis on trusted supply chains means shifting critical production out of China into friendlier economies like India and Vietnam. The focus on maritime cooperation recognizes anxieties around Chinese assertiveness in the South China Sea and beyond. And the invitation list heavily features China's neighbors and rivals, while excluding Beijing itself. In essence, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework aims to reinforce American economic leadership in Asia as a counterweight to combat China's growing dominance. While Beijing has so far refrained from forcefully criticizing the IPEF, Chinese media makes clear that it sees the effort as a thinly veiled attempt to contain China's rightful development. But with leading economies like Japan, Singapore and South Korea on board, China must tread carefully in its response. The full impact of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework remains to be seen. Much depends on developing tangible programs under the four pillars that deliver practical value for partners. With its flexible structure, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework appears designed as a "get stuff done" initiative, not just empty talk. But execution will require compromises between economies at different developmental stages. The framework has the potential to shape Asia's economic architecture for decades to come. Whether that tilts toward a China-centric or a more multipolar system is perhaps the fundamental long-term challenge. In many ways, the IPEF represents the economic dimension of a larger contest unfolding. It is the latest arena where the post-World War II era of U.S. primacy in Asia collides with China's resolute ambition to reclaim its historic status. Can the U.S. summon the focus and resources to compete on economics, technology and institutions? Will China overreach in its backyard? The great game of geopolitical chess continues, with nothing less than the Indo-Pacific's future in the balance. Thanks for watching.